October is American Archives Month, but instead of talking about the archival profession or best practices or standards of the industry, I wanted to take the archive into our own homes, into our own lives, and chat a little bit about how we are all, by default, the archivists of our lives. And I want to cover some of the pros and cons and challenges and other duties as assigned that this unexpected job comes with. And I want to focus today specifically on kids' art. Now, whether you have a kid, you had a kid who's grown up, or maybe you just were a kid, chances are the kid in your life at some point made a lot of art. Now, this art can be a vibrant and fun part of your family archive. The papers help to make up your family history and document stories, and they may also make up a potentially gigantic pile of papers that you've stuffed away in your back room or your closet or your basement, right? Yeeks! So, are you feeling overwhelmed yet? Hi, my name is Lindsay Smith with Exhibit Smith. I'm rethinking the way we save our stuff. I help people interpret, preserve, and better understand the objects that make up our world. If you have a lot of stuff, it might feel overwhelming. But believe it or not, I truly believe that artifact and heirloom preservation can be both easy and fun. In fact, I've developed a series of introductory level workshops on this topic and others just to prove my point. Learn more about them at exhibitsmith.com. Okay, I have 2 kids. And when my son was little, I kept hearing parents talk about all the art their kids made. And they'd bring it home from daycare and then preschool and school, not to mention the papers and masterpieces that would somehow miraculously accumulate in the evenings and weekends from never-ending painting and drawing and creating. But back then, I couldn't really relate to those stories because my son only wanted to play with cars and trucks and trains, anything with wheels. When he did bring home art, it would be from a class project, usually something holiday related, like his footprints shaped into a heart for Valentine's Day, cutesy stuff like that. So back then, selecting which art to keep and which art to toss was pretty straightforward. My daughter, however, has always been an artist. As I speak, our dining room table is covered with paper and markers and ribbon and glues and beads and slime that she made herself. And when she was little, instead of gravitating toward cars and trucks, she frequented the art table and brought home paintings and drawings and crafts all the time. And this has continued into elementary school and even after school by way of art classes and art camps. She brings home beautiful portfolios full of art, mixed media, oversized paintings, drawings, and it starts to feel pretty cluttered at home. And now I understand what all those parents have been telling me. So what should we and can we do with it all? When I ask my daughter about her creations at first, she wants to keep everything because it's important to her, right? So what do I do? Well, it's up to me to figure out what to keep, what to toss, and how to do all that stuff. And in order to be successful at this, you have to know and understand your own personal organizational style. If you don't know what system works best for you, then this is going to be a lot more difficult. And because you are the archivist, surprise, and you are in charge of your family's collection, surprise, you get to create a system that works for you. There is no formal archival processing being done here, so embrace the ability to make your own decisions and do this your way. Now, that said, are you the kind of person who wants to sort through the papers every day as the kid comes home from school, decide what to keep and what to toss and get it over with right then and there? Or would you rather set it aside in a bin and wait a while to start sorting through it? Personally, I prefer a hybrid approach because a lot of the art and even the schoolwork that my daughter brings home, even if I don't think they're important, there's still things she wants to hold on to at least for a little while. So even if you're a one and done kind of review it and toss it kind of person, you have to work alongside the creator. And honestly, that's fine. Keeping something for a week or a month or even 6 months is very different than putting it aside, forgetting about it, and keeping it for the rest of your life. So more often than not, I find myself throwing everything into a big bin that lives in our basement and I deal with it later. Then a couple times a year, usually on like a rainy Saturday morning, I sit down with my coffee in the bin and a garbage bag. And I found that it's actually easier to make these sorts of decisions in bulk when the stuff isn't brand new. Because when you see the progression of work over the course of a few months, you'll have a new perspective on what's really important to keep, both from your point of view and from the artist's. So now to do this effectively, there is a time commitment involved, but it's been an overall positive process for me. It's also helpful because if my kids haven't been asking where a school paper or a graphic novel draft or a masterpiece went, I know it's pretty safe to toss. And no one wants to toss something that's important to someone else just because you can't get that back, right? Once it's tossed. Now, occasionally you'll want to revisit the bins that you've already decided to keep, because at some point that bin is going to fill up and you'll need to start at the back at the beginning and reassess the entire collection of art, because as your kids grow, the process just keeps growing. But you'll have that similar perspective that the things you felt were vital to keep in second grade because these were amazing once in a lifetime pieces, by fifth grade, you realize that you can be a little more selective across the board. Now, this constant reassessing is where this whole process can start to feel like a job. But hopefully over time, this part will go quicker and quicker, especially as you're more familiar with the things you decided to keep. So every year or 2 or 3 years, whenever that bin gets too filled, review everything and say, oh, that paper I really wanted to keep 3 years ago, and then I still wanted to keep it last year. Now I think it's been superseded by some other cool thing that's walked through the door and we don't need it anymore because we have a bunch of other stuff. Again, it's time consuming, but I promise it will get easier if you stay on top of it. I also like to share favorite art pieces throughout the year. We don't want to keep everything in a bin. What's it going to do in a bin, right? And the easiest way I found to do this is to focus on holiday or seasonal artwork. So let's say you have a painting of spring flowers or a drawing of a spooky skeleton or the snowflake collage or whatever you have that walks its way through the door after school. Now, these can all be added to your seasonal decor in a wonderful, personal way. So what you want to do is keep them front of mind. You want to store them alongside the rest of that season's decor. So when that item comes through the door and it goes through the process and you realize you want to keep it, don't keep it in that bin with everything else, because you'll keep looking at that bin once a year and you'll say, oh, I missed it, another Halloween that I could have hung that up. So when you put up the spring wreath or the pumpkin candles or the Christmas tree, you will unpack whatever storage you have that in and you will see that season's artwork right there. Maybe you'll even save some money at the home decor store because you can use more artwork around the house. So this will also help you figure out what to keep, because maybe your kid has strong opinions about a special kind of artwork and really does or does not want to see it on display, right? And this can change as you grow. That Christmas tree they made when they were 4, that you hung up on the fridge every year might be a little embarrassing to a 14-year-old, right? But maybe they'll make something new to replace it, and that's perfectly fine. Or maybe they'll just want to keep it, but not want it front and center. And those are all questions that you can deal with down the road because you've already assessed which items are important and you're not overwhelmed by how many you have. Because every masterpiece is different, of course. And in any event, now that these items are being integrated into your holiday storage and holiday decor, so you can use it and reassess it every year, I just find that to be quite helpful. Right now, I am going to be putting up some fall decorations, and I know where I have some old Halloween art, and I'll run it by the kids to see if they want it on display. And if not, then that's fine, and we'll reassess whether we need it forever at that time. Okay, so now let's talk about the archival and preservation and storage, right? Or maybe not. Okay, so in most of the talks that I give, I talk about creating the ideal storage environment. And since it is American Archives Month, I feel like I should be leaning toward that. Talking about the things you need to properly store and maintain correct environmental conditions and storage conditions, yada, 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 right? I've even mentioned it here on past podcast episodes, and I can get pretty technical about this stuff. Which materials to buy, which products to source, how to create the perfect temperature and humidity, the climate control. But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about you being the archivist in your own home. And kids' art is a whole other situation. It's a horse of a different color. If anyone listening is old enough to actually catch a Wizard of Oz reference. Kids' art has a couple of major things going on, though, that we do need to at least think about. So first of all, the kids' art is probably not that old. Even the kids' art I still have from when I was a kid is not that old. Thank you very much. Even though my kids would probably disagree because they think I'm ancient. So as long as you have a dedicated space that's in a cool, dark, dry, and stable environment, storing the art in a plastic tub or bin or cardboard box should be sufficient. Because the goal right now is to keep it contained, organized, and accessible. We're not yet worrying about the issues that we might encounter decades down the road as things start to naturally deteriorate. And since you're actively reassessing the collection every year and whittling it down as more items come in, there's no need to get very technical at this point in regard to the storage. However, speaking of deterioration, even though it's newer art, kids' art can be all over the place, right? I mean, mixed media to the max. We might be dealing with a little bit of everything. I'm talking glitter, sequins, beads, Q-tips, crayons, markers, dried pasta glued to construction paper. Things might be gigantic. They might be tiny. You might have clay bowls or artwork made from old bottle caps or paper clips or pipe cleaners. Things that may or may not stand the test of time, especially when stored together. Yikes. And you open up your bin and there's a bunch of glitter and beads that have fallen to the bottom and kind of gotten on everything in between. Eek. So when you're evaluating the art, if something is falling apart, it's covered in glitter, etc., you may need to just put it in a special container, envelope of its own, and maybe have some harder questions asked about whether this piece is really worth keeping for the long run. And if something's simply too high maintenance, you can always take a picture of it, right? Take a picture, store it in a special folder on your computer or share it online. Sometimes I'll include these pictures in the family photo albums that I get printed every year. So it's an easy way to keep a memory accessible, especially if it's a little more high maintenance or unique, shall I say. And this reminds me of a masterpiece, a rare masterpiece that my son brought home from daycare. I'm not sure if it had to do with a book they were reading or something, because as I said, he wasn't usually gravitating toward the art table. But picture this, a paper plate painted black, covered with cotton balls that are also black, and fitted with a odd looking construction paper face that you can't quite tell what it's supposed to be, but I think it's a black sheep, maybe? So I'm thinking it had to do with some kind of class project, but I have no idea. And when the time came to assess that strange, high maintenance mixed media masterpiece, I took a photo of it and promptly removed the original from our house. I didn't want to keep it, but I didn't want to forget that either, right? So it's part of the social media promoting this episode. So if you go to Facebook and Instagram to Exhibitsmith, check out the art and tell me what you think it's supposed to be. Anyhow, when in doubt, you can always snap a photo. You can even reproduce the photo on a coffee mugs, t-shirts, et cetera, et cetera. What a world we live in, right? Photos make things so much easier. Okay, now in this last part, I wanted to remind us that we're not just dealing about art with art here, right? There's more than just art that needs to be sorted. And it's also important and fun to keep some schoolwork too. And like the art, your perspective on kids' schoolwork will and should change over time as they learn and grow. So keep a couple things from their earliest years when they're just learning their alphabet or writing their name, and then find key examples that show their academic progression over the years, and keep just a couple of those as the timeline progresses, because you don't need to keep everything. So focus on the milestones, personal narratives, projects that were time-consuming or particularly memorable. And like with the art, school papers tend to multiply. And before you know it, your bin will not be full of just art and schoolwork, but also programs and medals and certificates and other things that they've collected along the way that also tell their unique story. So now the bin will be extra full, and reassessing the collection might again feel overwhelming. Nevertheless, I encourage you to keep at it. Create a collection of memorable items that the kids will deal with one day. Do it correctly, and they won't be stressing about dealing with it when they're grown. It'll be like a little time capsule that will be fun to reminisce and share, not overwhelming. Now, my mom was really good about keeping certain things of mine as I grew. And thankfully, I don't have too much, though I do have memorable reports from elementary school, special art pieces, poems I wrote, certificates, etc. It's not an overwhelming amount of stuff by any means, thank goodness, but I also have my baby books. And as I grew older, a lot of music programs and other stuff that became very important to me. And then there's all the things I ever accumulated as an adult, and even more music programs that I just don't want to toss. And honestly, I have too much stuff too. Me, the one speaking on this. I admit it. However, every time I sit down with it, and I do sit down with a lot of those items more often than most people I'd imagine, because I am an archivist and I kind of always have been by nature, I get lost in the past and I end up reminiscing. It's a hobby of mine, I suppose. And with every passing year, it gets harder and harder for me to reevaluate and get rid of my own stuff because it gets older and older. And I found that the older something gets, the harder it is to toss, no matter how valuable or important or not the item is. It's just how it goes. And despite making some very deep cuts to my personal collection before our cross-country move a couple of years ago, I still have too much stuff. And I'm looking at it now saying, oh, this is decades old. I can't toss it now. Where that mindset comes from, I don't know. But keep that in mind. If you get rid of what you need to right now, you won't have these harder questions down the road. So I'm saying this as a warning. Please don't set your kids up for that scenario. Assess, reassess, and stay on track and curate and purge consistently and thoughtfully for them. If you're not sure how to proceed, I do have a free downloadable resource on my website that asks 3 questions that you want to ask yourself when considering whether to downsize something or whether to get rid of it. It's available at exhibitsmith.com. Because we're living in a time and a place where art supplies and paper are plentiful, and we are so fortunate to have time in our week to be able to sit and create for the sake of creating, I hope you embrace those opportunities with you and your family and enjoy the art and the work that your children are producing and sharing with you. But remember not to make the quantity of the material that is being produced overwhelm you. You are in charge. Make thoughtful decisions, do it consistently, and you will curate a collection that will be both manageable and memorable. You got this. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I invite you to subscribe to my podcast, and once again, you can see everything Exhibit Smith is up to at exhibitsmith.com, including grabbing yourself some free downloadable resources. Thank you for listening. I'm already looking forward to the next episode.